I walked down the aisle with a split lip while my bride laughed. At the altar, Bianca handed me a pin to sign away Dad's $58 million company. I snapped it, reaching into my boutonniere. 300 guests filled St. Bartholomew's Cathedral, and every single one of them learned, in the same breath, how not to look at my face. That is what money teaches first. Not manners, direction. Senators studied their programs. Investors admired the stained glass. Women with names on hospital wings tilted their heads toward the lilies arranged along the aisle like those flowers had suddenly become urgent legal documents. Anywhere but my mouth. Anywhere but the split in my lower lip, sealed badly under makeup that had not been designed to hide blood, or the bruise beginning to darken along my left cheekbone. My makeup artist, Mara, had cried while covering it. I had not. Crying would have blurred the work, and I needed the camera to see clearly later. The organ played Bach. I walked at the pace rehearsed 2 nights earlier, one step, then another, with the white rose boutonniere pinned to my lapel and a flash drive sitting inside it where no one in that cathedral thought to look. Bianca Hartwell stood at the altar in a silk gown that made her look softer than she had ever been. That was the genius of her kind of beauty. It turned harm into something people wanted explained gently. She watched me come toward her with a small smile. Not nervous. Not moved. Amused. Her mother, Margaret, sat in the front pew in ivory silk and diamonds, one gloved hand folded over the other, wearing the expression of a woman watching escrow close. When I reached the altar steps, Bianca leaned toward her maid of honor and said, not quietly enough, "He just needed to be reminded who owns the room before we made it official." Laughter moved through the front rows. Easy laughter. The kind people give when cruelty comes from someone powerful enough to make laughing feel safer than silence. I felt it pass over me like whether I had already decided not to stand under. Bianca took my hand. Her grip was exact, tight enough to hurt the bruised knuckle she already knew about, light enough that no one would see. "You look pale," she whispered. "I'm fine." "You will be," she said, "once you sign." Reverend Samuel Briggs looked at me from behind his Bible, and for half a second I saw the only honest face in the room. Pity. Then Bianca guided me toward the small signing table beside the altar, where a gold pin waited like a weapon pretending to be elegant. Everyone else kept pretending this was still a wedding and not evidence. Bianca lifted the gold pin from the table and pressed it into my palm. It was heavy, monogrammed, Hartwell crest on the cap, because even the instrument meant to steal my father's company had to advertise who would own the theft. "Registry first," she murmured, smiling toward the congregation. "Let's make it official before God." The document waited beside the marriage license. Marital estate planning and succession agreement. Nice title. Polite title. The kind of title designed to make surrender sound organized. My shares in Kellerdyne. My board voting rights. My veto over any merger. My father's Lake Tahoe property. All folded into a trust structure I would not control the second ink touched paper. 300 people watched me look down. Bianca's thumb brushed my wrist. "Sign it," she whispered. I held the pen for exactly 1 second. Then I snapped it in half. The crack cut through the cathedral harder than the organ ever had. Bianca's smile froze. Somewhere behind us, Margaret inhaled. I set both broken pieces on the signing table. "I prefer," I said, "to sign endings I write myself." Then I reached to the white rose on my lapel, pulled the silver flash drive from inside the boutonniere, and watched Bianca Hartwell finally understand this was not her ceremony anymore. "My name is Adrian Keller. I am 33 years old, and I have been CEO of Kellerdyne Systems, though some mornings I still hear my father correcting how I hold a pen. Kellerdyne was not born in a boardroom. My father, Dr. Matthias Keller, built the first version of our infrastructure software in the garage of a house in Palo Alto, after leaving a research position he described as comfortable enough to ruin him. He was German, stubborn, and allergic to shortcuts. For 26 years, he turned that garage experiment into a $58 million company with 38 active patents, government contracts, and engineers who still lowered their voices when they spoke about him. He died 18 months before the wedding. Pancreatic cancer. October diagnosis. February funeral. The kind of timeline that makes grief feel less like an emotion and more like paperwork arriving faster than breath. The last real conversation we had happened in a hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and cold coffee. His hands had become too thin for the watch he refused to take off. I remember that because I kept staring at the gap between leather and bone, trying not to look at the rest of him disappearing. "The company is yours, Adrian," he said. I told him we would talk about that when he came home. He gave me the look he used when an engineer tried to sell him optimism instead of data. "Not because you are my son," he said, "because you read the whole page." Then he gripped my wrist with strength he should not have had left. "Promise me something. Read everything before you sign anything. People only rush your signature when they are afraid of your eyes." I promised. After he died, people called me lucky. Lucky to inherit Kellerdyne. Lucky to have a company built. Lucky, as if grief and responsibility came gift-wrapped. They never understood that inheritance is not ownership until you defend it. And on my wedding day, with blood in my mouth and Bianca's pen in my hand, I understood what he had been warning me about. Bianca Hartwell entered my life 6 months after my father's funeral, at a charity gala I attended only because Priya Menon told me disappearing socially would make investors nervous. I was still sleeping badly then, still drinking coffee that had gone cold because I forgot it existed, still signing documents in my father's office, while feeling like I was trespassing behind his desk. Bianca found me beside the donor wall, reading the program instead of networking. "You're hiding," she said. I looked up. She was 35, black dress, dark hair pinned low, one of those women who seemed built for rooms where everyone else adjusted themselves around her. But she did not lead with money. That was what made her dangerous. She asked about Kellerdyne's architecture. Not valuation, not exit strategy, architecture. For 20 minutes, she spoke about infrastructure software like she had actually listened to people who built things. I wanted that to mean she saw me. Grief makes hunger look like connection if you are not careful. The first red flag came 3 months later over dinner in Menlo Park. Bianca mentioned, almost casually, that Hartwell Capital had always admired Kellerdyne and that certain synergies between our government contracting pipeline and their portfolio companies could be powerful. I filed it under business language. People like Bianca spoke in business language the way other people breathed. The second red flag came from Margaret. By then, Bianca's mother had become a Sunday lunch institution. Ivory blouses, diamond earrings, warmth measured in teaspoons. She asked whether I found the CEO role heavy so soon after my father's passing. "I have a strong team," I said. "Of course," Margaret replied. "But companies need the right hands long term. Sentiment is admirable, Adrian. Governance is better." Bianca touched my arm under the table. A warning or comfort? I chose comfort because I was tired of warnings. That was the mistake I kept making with her. I treated polished concern like love and strategic curiosity like intimacy, while the Hartwells stood close enough to measure the company my father left me. They were not admiring it. They were appraising it. The third red flag was not red. It was black. 8 months before the wedding, I returned from a cybersecurity summit in Singapore and found an email chain buried under calendar confirmations. My assistant, Nathan Greer, had flagged it as FYI, not urgent, which told me the sender had dressed the knife properly. Subject line: Keller Strategic Alignment Preliminary Discussion. Participants: Hartwell Capital's legal team and 3 members of my own board. Not me. Not Luis Moreno, my COO. No agenda attached. No explanation. No harmless version of why my fiancé's family office was meeting privately with directors protecting the company my father built. I called Luis at 11:18 p.m. He answered on the second ring. "Tell me this is a server issue," he said. "It's worse." He listened while I read the names. Luis had worked beside my father from year 9 of Keller, back when payroll still meant my mother delaying a roof repair so engineers could get paid first. He was not dramatic. He never needed to be. When I finished, he said, "Adrian, how much do you know about Hartwell's current portfolio?" "Not enough." "Then find out quietly." So I did. 2 days later, I was on a call with Sandra Cho, a CFA who had tracked private equity consolidation in mid-market infrastructure tech for 12 years. Priya had introduced us with one sentence: Sandra sees patterns before people admit they exist. Sandra did not waste time. Hartwell Capital had spent 14 months acquiring minority positions in companies adjacent to Keller, suppliers, integration partners, a cloud compliance vendor, a smaller competitor with weak governance and strong patents. Individually, each purchase looked boring. Together, they formed a map. "And Keller?" I asked. Sandra paused long enough for the silence to become an answer. "Your voting rights are the missing hinge," she said. "With them, Hartwell could control a slice of enterprise infrastructure in the Pacific defense market." "How much?" "9 figures, minimum." I looked at my father's photograph on the shelf. Then I understood. Bianca had not fallen in love with me. She had found the door. The next morning, I called Bianca from my office before sunrise. She answered on the 4th ring, voice soft with sleep and irritation she had not polished away. "Adrian." "I've been thinking," I said. "About 9 figures. About 3 board members. About my father's photograph watching me like he was waiting to see whether I had learned anything." Bianca exhaled. "About us." "Yes." There was a pause on the line. I could hear her sitting up. "I don't want to keep delaying," I said. "Spring would be beautiful for the wedding." The silence that followed was not surprise. It was calculation changing speed. Then her voice warmed. "I was hoping you'd say that." I looked at the email chain printed on my desk. Hartwell Capital, Keller Strategic Alignment. 3 directors who had stopped returning Luis's calls quickly. "So was I," I said. That was the first lie I told well enough to survive for months. The engagement became theater. I let Bianca choose dates, tastings, linen colors, cathedral flowers. I sat through meetings with planners who discussed aisle width while Priya built a litigation map. I let Margaret call me family in front of donors and watch my face for gratitude. I gave her gratitude. I gave Bianca tenderness when she reached for it. I gave the Hartwells the version of me they wanted most: grieving, relieved, pliable, proud to be accepted by people who thought acceptance was a leash. At night, I sent Priya documents. Robert Vale's investigators traced calls. Sandra Cho mapped positions. Luis watched access logs and kept board material away from directors who could not be trusted. I did not feel clever. I felt filthy. But there are traps you enter because you are weak, and traps you enter because you have already measured the exits. The document Bianca planned to give me before the wedding was not a prenup. It was labeled like one. marital estate planning, and succession agreement. That was how rich people make theft sound like administration. I found it in Bianca's home office on a Tuesday night, while she was downstairs taking a call with Margaret. I did not break a lock. I did not hack a server. She had left the folder in the second drawer of a desk she assumed I was too respectful or too broken to open. I photographed every page. Then I sent the images to Priya Menon. She called me 12 minutes later. "This is not a prenup," she said. I already knew that from the way my stomach had gone cold. Priya continued anyway, because lawyers like her believe horror should be named precisely. "This transfers your Kellerdyne shares into a trust structure controlled through Hartwell entities. Voting rights go with the shares. Your merger veto disappears. The Lake Tahoe property becomes collateral. IP licensing authority shifts to a management committee where Hartwell appoints the deciding member." She stopped. "This is a hostile acquisition wearing a wedding ring." I looked at the engagement photo Bianca had framed on my desk. In it, she looked happy. Now I understood why. We had 4 months. 4 months until St. Bartholomew's Cathedral filled with people who would pretend not to see anything they were not paid, raised, or trained to see. 4 months until Hartwell Capital expected me to stand beside Bianca, smile for cameras, and sign my father out of his own company before the first glass of champagne was poured. So I kept the ring on her finger. I went to Sunday lunches at Margaret's house and listened while she discussed floral arrangements like she had not tried to build a legal cage around my name. I let Bianca kiss me in front of donors. I let her rest her hand on my arm when investors asked about Kellerdyne, as if proximity were already ownership. I smiled. That was the part one hated most. Not the investigation, not the files, not the late nights sending documents to Priya through encrypted channels while Bianca slept beside me, one hand open on the pillow like innocence had a shape. The smiling. Robert Vale and his team began building the record. Payments to 3 board members. Calls routed through personal phones. Calendar invites scrubbed from corporate accounts. Draft merger language moving between Hartwell lawyers and directors who still sat at my father's board table. Sandra Cho mapped Hartwell's portfolio positions until the pattern was no longer an argument. It was a net. Luis Moreno watched internal access logs and fed Priya every irregular request. I kept playing the groom. Cake tastings, seating charts, dance lessons in a studio where Bianca laughed when I missed a step and said, "You always think too much." She was right. I was thinking about timestamps, wire trails, voting rights, and how to survive long enough for arrogance to make them sloppy. By April, Priya had a phrase for the case. "Let them walk themselves into the room," she said. So I held the door open. 4 weeks before the wedding, I hired Paul Reyes to break into a cathedral with permission. That was how he described it. Paul was bonded, licensed, and had spent 16 years installing security systems in houses where people owned art worth more than my first apartment. Priya found him. Robert vetted him. I paid him in full and asked no questions about the jobs he had refused before mine. At 4 a.m. on a Monday, Paul installed a concealed camera in the groom's suite at St. Bartholomew's. The lens was smaller than a shirt button, hidden in the decorative molding above the vanity mirror. The angle covered the couch, the signing table, the door, and anyone standing close enough to think privacy made them safe. The feed ran encrypted to a receiver in my car, parked 2 blocks away, where Robert's team would monitor everything the morning of the wedding. Priya had predicted the location. "No witnesses," she said. "Time pressure. Formal clothes. They'll want you cornered before the aisle." So I gave them a corner with a camera. Margaret Hartwell entered the groom's suite at 7:45 that morning. She did not knock. Women like Margaret considered knocking something other people did before entering rooms that mattered. I was standing in front of the vanity mirror, adjusting a tie I had tied correctly 3 times already, when she appeared behind me in ivory silk and lace gloves. She looked less like the mother of the bride than the executor of a transaction. She placed a folder on the small table near the couch. "Just a formality," she said. "Bianca wants the legal matters settled before the ceremony." I looked at the title. Marital Estate Planning and Succession Agreement. "I read it in February," I said. For the first time since I had known her, Margaret's face lost its warmth before she chose to remove it. "How disappointing," she said. "Accurate, though." She smiled then, not kindly. "If you refuse to sign, certain emails and video clips will reach the board before Monday. Enough to suggest instability, controlling behavior, a pattern of aggression toward Bianca. Fabricated. Convincingly." I felt the camera above the mirror watching both of us. Margaret leaned closer. "By the time truth catches up, the merger will be filed and your father's little company will belong to adults." I said nothing. She tapped the folder once. "Sign it, Adrian, or my daughter will remind you what happens when sentimental men mistake inheritance for power." Bianca came in 20 minutes later. She was already dressed. White silk, bare shoulders, diamonds at her ears, the kind of bridal beauty that made people forgive things before they knew what had happened. She closed the door behind her. Margaret had left the folder on the table like bait. Bianca glanced at it, then at me, then at the mirror above the vanity, without seeing the lens hidden in the molding. "You embarrass my mother," she said. I corrected her. Bianca's smile moved without warmth. "That's what I mean." She walked toward the table and opened the folder to the signature page. Her movements were calm, almost bored, as if this were a scheduling issue and not the attempted transfer of everything my father had spent his life building. "Sign it, Adrian." "No." Her eyes lifted. There it was. Not surprise. Permission. The moment she had been waiting for because it gave her the shape of the story she wanted. "You're unstable," she said softly. "You know that, right? Since your father died, everyone has been worried. Me, my mother, the board. You are controlling, paranoid, defensive. You make people afraid to help you." I looked at the camera's reflection in the mirror and kept my hands at my sides. The hardest part was not the blood that came later. It was knowing that if I raised one hand, even to protect myself, they would finally have the story they wanted. Bianca stepped close enough that I smelled orange blossom in her perfume. "You don't get to ruin this for us," she whispered. Then she drew her hand back and hit me across the mouth. Not a slap. A backhand. Deliberate. The diamond on her engagement ring cut my lower lip and caught the edge of my cheekbone. My head turned with the force of it. Blood filled my mouth so fast it tasted like metal before pain arrived. Bianca looked at what she had done. Then she straightened the front of my jacket. "Now," she said, voice steady, "you will clean yourself up, walk down that aisle, and sign." I wiped my mouth once. Then I called Mara back in. 20 minutes later, I walked toward the altar with my blood under Bianca's ring and the flash drive hidden in my boutonniere. The flash drive looked almost ridiculous in my hand. Small, silver, ordinary. Nothing about it suggested 4 months of surveillance planning, forensic accounting, board corruption, and the exact moment my blood hit Bianca's ring. That was the useful thing about evidence. It did not have to look powerful to be powerful. Bianca took one step toward me. "Adrian," she said. Not angry now. Warning. Margaret stood in the front pew. "Stop this," she said, low enough that only the first rows heard her, but sharp enough that they understood it was not a request. I walked to Reverend Samuel Briggs's podium. The Reverend was 72, white-haired, and had known my father well enough to once lose an argument with him about baptismal fonts and server architecture in the same afternoon. Priya had briefed him 2 nights earlier. I had expected concern, maybe refusal. Instead, he had listened quietly and said, "A sanctuary is not a place for fraud to hide." Now he stepped aside without a word. That movement did more to break the room than the pen had. I plugged the flash drive into the projector port beneath the podium's media panel. For 1 second, nothing happened. Then the 20-foot screen behind the altar flickered blue, bright against the stained glass and white lilies. A file opened. The groom's suite appeared. Timestamp, 7:45 a.m. There I was in my tuxedo, standing near the vanity mirror. Margaret entered behind me in ivory silk, carrying the folder she had called a formality. Her recorded voice filled the cathedral. "Bianca wants the legal matters settled before the ceremony." 300 guests stopped breathing at once. Margaret's face on the screen was perfectly lit. That almost bothered me more than anything. The camera caught every detail: the ivory silk, the lace gloves, the folder sliding across the table like a knife set down politely. "We need those voting rights transferred and filed before 10, her recorded voice said. "My daughter is not marrying a sentimental little engineer with legal opinions." The first sound from the congregation was not outrage. It was confusion. Powerful people do not panic immediately. First, they search for the version of events that lets them stay comfortable. Then the video kept playing. "If you refuse to sign, certain emails and video clips will reach the board before Monday," Margaret said. Enough to suggest instability, controlling behavior, a pattern of aggression toward Bianca. Someone in the third row whispered, "Oh my God." Then Bianca appeared on screen. The real Bianca, standing 3 feet from me at the altar, went still in a way I had never seen from her before. No smile, no performance, just the body learning it had been caught before the mind could write a new script. On screen, she closed the groom's suite door. "You embarrassed my mother," her recorded voice said. The cathedral watched her open the folder, watched me say no, watched her move close enough to strike. Then her hand came back. The sound of the blow hit the cathedral speakers with a clean, ugly crack. Several guests screamed. A senator's wife covered her mouth with both hands. One of Bianca's bridesmaids stepped backward so fast she knocked into the altar flowers. The real Bianca lunged for the projector cord. She did not make it 2 steps. Davies and Park, my security detail dressed as ushers since 7 that morning, stepped forward from opposite aisles and stopped her without raising their voices. On screen, my blood touched her ring. In the cathedral, nobody laughed anymore. Bianca dropped to her knees. No one forced her. That was the terrifying part. 1 second she was being held back by Davies and Park. The next, she folded into the aisle in white silk and diamonds, hands trembling at her mouth like a woman watching her life collapse for reasons she could not understand. It was beautiful work. I hate admitting that. Her first sob sounded real enough to make the front pew lean toward her. "It's not real," she said. Her voice broke exactly where it needed to. "That video is not real." Margaret stood frozen behind her, but Bianca had already moved past her mother's strategy into something more dangerous. Instinct, performance, survival. "Adrian has been unstable since his father died," she said, looking out at the guests, not at me. "He tracks my calls. He reads my emails. He says everyone is stealing from him. I tried to help him." A murmur moved through the cathedral. I felt it before I understood it. The room was changing. Not completely, not all at once, but enough. People looked from the screen to my face, from my split lip to Bianca's tears, searching for a version of the story where they would not have to believe what they had just seen. That is how power protects itself. It does not deny evidence immediately. It asks whether the evidence has context. Bianca pressed a hand to her chest. He made that video to punish me because I wouldn't give him control. He's grieving. He's paranoid. He needs help. Then she looked at me for the first time. Her eyes were wet. Her mouth barely moved. "You won't win," she whispered. "They'll believe the bride." For one cold second, I thought she might be right. Then I stepped toward the microphone. The microphone was colder than I expected. That is a stupid detail to remember, but I remember it exactly. My fingers closed around the stem, and for the first time all morning, the room was looking directly at me. Not safely. Directly. "Deepfakes are convincing," I said. "I know that. Everyone in this room knows that." Bianca's breathing changed. She was still on her knees, still beautiful, still crying. But her eyes sharpened, because she understood tone better than most people understood language. "But they have one problem," I said. "They don't leave DNA." I turned toward the left side aisle. Detective Marcus Hale stepped out from behind the last row. He was 60, compact, gray-haired, and calm in the way men become calm after 30 years of hearing people lie badly and well. He had spent most of his career in financial crimes before joining a joint corporate coercion task force, which meant Priya trusted him with things that looked clean and smelled rotten. He walked forward slowly, pulling on blue nitrile gloves. Bianca stopped crying. Not gradually. Stopped. "Extend your left hand, Ms. Hartwell," Detective Hale said. Bianca looked at Margaret. That was her mistake. Half the cathedral saw it. Davies moved one step closer. Park did the same. Bianca lifted her left hand, trembling now without performance. Detective Hale held her wrist, not roughly, and removed the engagement ring. The diamond caught the cathedral light. So did the small dark smear caught beneath one prong, where gold met stone. My blood. Bianca had washed her hand after hitting me. She had adjusted her veil, smiled for photos, walked to the altar, and forgotten that violence leaves evidence in places vanity does not inspect. Hale dropped the ring into an evidence bag. The plastic sealed with a soft click. That sound ended her version of the story. The cathedral doors opened. Not dramatically. Just opened. But the sound carried through the room like every hinge in the building had been waiting for its cue. Federal agents entered first, dark suits moving with the quiet efficiency of people who did not need volume because warrants had already done the speaking. Behind them came Priya Menon, charcoal blazer, leather briefcase in one hand, expression flat enough to make panic look undignified. She stopped at the altar steps. "Bianca Hartwell," she said, "Hartwell Capital is under an SEC emergency asset freeze effective as of 9:55 this morning." Bianca's face emptied. Margaret stood in the front pew. "That is absurd." Priya turned to her. "Mrs. Hartwell, the accounts used to purchase several personal assets are included in the federal review. That includes the diamond necklace you are currently wearing." For the first time all morning, Margaret looked down at herself like wealth had become evidence. Her gloved fingers went to the clasp. They trembled once. Not much. Enough. She removed the necklace slowly and placed it into the evidence pouch an agent held open beside Priya. No one spoke. The diamonds looked smaller in plastic. Everything did, once it stopped being protected by fear. Bianca tried to stand. Davies did not touch her. He only shifted closer, and that was enough. "The board meeting started at 10, she said, voice rising now, stripped of tears. Your people are too late. The merger vote is already in session. That was her last card. I looked toward the 5 Kellerdyne board members seated in the second and third rows, the same men who had spent months deciding whether my father's company could be sold out from under me during my own wedding. Check your phones, I said. All 5 did. Robert Vale's 44-page forensic report had gone live on Kellerdyne's secure board portal at 9:55 a.m. It named the 3 compromised directors, documented Hartwell payments, and triggered emergency suspension of their voting rights. No quorum. No vote. No merger. Bianca read the room and finally understood. Kellerdyne was still mine. Bianca looked at me like I had committed the betrayal. That was almost funny. Almost. You used me, she said. Her voice had gone flat now. No tears. No trembling. Just the empty sound of someone whose performance had run out before the audience did. I stepped closer, not because I needed her to hear me, but because I wanted the next part spoken quietly. Some truths do more damage when they are not shouted. I started planning this the week your mother threatened Louise for refusing to send board packets to her private email, I said. I kept going when your assistant made Nathan cry in the parking garage for asking why Hartwell lawyers were meeting my directors. I stayed engaged after I found the document in your desk because by then I understood what you were trying to take. Bianca's jaw tightened. I looked past her for half a second, at the broken gold pen on the signing table, then back at her. You thought grief made me soft. You thought a dead father, a wedding, and 300 witnesses would make me too ashamed to read the page. I let that sit between us. Then I said the sentence I had carried for 4 months. The engagement was your trap. Bianca's eyes hardened. The wedding was mine. I took off the torn boutonniere and placed it beside the broken pen. The ending is mine, too. Federal agents moved in from both sides of the aisle. They did not rush. They did not need to. By then, the cathedral had already shifted from audience to witness, and everyone understood the difference. Bianca stood when they told her to stand. For a second, she looked back at the altar, at the flowers, at the broken pen, at the screen still frozen on her hand striking my face. I think she was searching for the version of the morning where she still controlled the room. It was gone. Margaret followed 2 steps behind her, ivory silk immaculate, lace gloves folded over empty wrists, her diamond necklace sealed in Priya's briefcase like any other piece of evidence. They walked down the velvet aisle between white lilies and raised phones. The exact path arranged for a bride. 300 guests watched them pass. No one laughed now. No one looked away either. That may have been the cruelest part for them. The room had finally learned where to look. I reached over, switched off the sound system, and let the cathedral go quiet. Bianca was charged 3 weeks later. Assault causing bodily harm, coercive control, conspiracy to commit securities fraud, attempted fraud by inducement tied to the document she had tried to make me sign before the ceremony. She wore navy to the arraignment. Not white. Nathan attended because he said he needed to see at least one Hartwell sit in a room where interrupting did not work. He told me later her attorney kept touching his notes like the paper might give him confidence if he pressed hard enough. Margaret was charged separately. Conspiracy, securities manipulation, criminal intimidation, obstruction connected to the fabricated emails and video clips they had prepared to remove me from Kellerdyne's board. 3 directors resigned before Priya formally filed to remove them. The 4th cooperated with the SEC. The 5th called me the afternoon after the wedding and apologized for not seeing it sooner. I told him the record already saw enough. That was the only apology that mattered anymore. Robert Vale's report became something Priya later called clean enough to teach from. She said it without drama, which was how I knew she meant it. Sandra Cho published a paper 6 months later on coercive acquisition strategies in mid-market infrastructure tech. She did not name Hartwell Capital. She did not need to. Everyone who mattered already knew. Kellerdyne had its best quarter in 6 years that July. I presented the results to the new board in the same conference room where my father used to argue with engineers until midnight because he believed good work deserved honest pressure. When it came time to approve the report, someone handed me a pen. No one rushed me. No one touched my wrist. I read every page. Then I signed. My father's company was still my father's company. And mine.